"Get your hands behind your back now." Officer Ryan Kellerman's voice echoed through the crowded parking lot of Riverside Mall in downtown Millbrook. The 28-year-old rookie cop's hands shook slightly as he pointed his weapon at the quiet woman, who had been sitting peacefully on a bench, feeding pigeons from a small paper bag. Detective Luis Moreno stood beside him, his chest puffed out with authority as he barked orders at the unassuming figure before them. "You match the description perfectly. Brown hair, medium build, wearing a gray jacket. We know it was you who robbed the First National Bank on Elm Street. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The woman, appearing to be in her early 40s with gentle brown eyes and graying temples, slowly placed her hands behind her back without resistance. Her weathered face remained completely calm, showing neither fear nor anger as the cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She wore simple civilian clothes, faded jeans, worn sneakers, and that gray windbreaker that had apparently sealed her fate. To the growing crowd of onlookers recording with their phones, she looked exactly like what the officers claimed, a desperate criminal caught red-handed. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," Detective Moreno continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. At 45, he had been with the Millbrook Police Department for over 15 years and prided himself on quick arrests. The bank robbery had happened just 2 hours ago, and here they were, already closing the case. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The woman said nothing, her lips pressed together in a thin line as she stared straight ahead. Officer Kellerman roughly grabbed her arm, pulling her toward their patrol car as shoppers and passers-by gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing. "Look at her," one teenager said to his friend, holding up his phone to livestream the arrest. "She doesn't even look sorry, probably on drugs or something." An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter and shook her head in disgust. "In broad daylight, can you believe it? This neighborhood is going to hell." The suspect's silence seemed to irritate Detective Moreno even more. "Real tough guy, huh?" he sneered, walking alongside her as they approached the black and white patrol vehicle. "The silent treatment isn't going to help you when you're looking at 15 to 20 years behind bars. We've got witnesses, security footage, the whole 9 yards." Still, the woman said nothing, her breathing steady and controlled despite the chaos erupting around her. As Officer Kellerman fumbled with the car door handle, his adrenaline making him clumsy, something strange caught his attention. For just a brief moment, as the woman shifted her weight, the sleeve of her gray jacket rode up slightly, revealing what looked like a faded tattoo on her wrist. It appeared to be some kind of emblem or insignia, but before he could get a better look, she had adjusted her position, and the marking disappeared beneath the fabric once again. "Did you see that?" Kellerman whispered to his partner, but Moreno was too busy basking in the attention from the growing crowd to notice. A local news van had already arrived on scene, having monitored police scanners for breaking stories. Reporter Amanda Cross was setting up her camera equipment, preparing for a live broadcast about the swift arrest of the alleged bank robber. The woman glanced around the parking lot with what seemed like mild curiosity rather than the panic or desperation you'd expect from someone facing decades in prison. Her eyes moved methodically across the scene, taking in the positioning of the patrol cars, the locations of the officers, the excited civilians with their phones raised high. There was something unsettling about her composure that made Officer Kellerman's stomach tighten with unease. "Get in the car," Detective Moreno ordered, placing his hand firmly on top of her head as Kellerman held the door open. The woman complied without struggle, sliding into the back seat of the patrol car with an almost military-like precision in her movements. As she settled into position, she caught Officer Kellerman's eye through the window. For just a split second, He saw something there that made his blood run cold. Not the look of a cornered criminal, but the steady, calculating gaze of someone who was very much in control of the situation. Detective Moreno slammed the car door shut with unnecessary force, the sound echoing across the parking lot like a gunshot. "Another case closed," he announced loudly, making sure the news cameras captured his moment of triumph. "The citizens of Millbrook can sleep safely tonight, knowing we've got another dangerous criminal off the streets." The crowd applauded, several people shouting their approval and gratitude to the officers. But as the patrol car pulled away from the curb, something was already going wrong. Detective Moreno's radio crackled to life with an urgent transmission from headquarters. His confident smile began to fade as the voice on the other end delivered news that would turn this routine arrest into a career-ending nightmare. The woman in the back seat, the one they had just paraded in front of cameras and social media as a bank robber, was about to reveal exactly who they had just humiliated in front of half the city. They had arrested the wrong woman. And not just any wrong woman. They had just handcuffed and publicly humiliated someone whose true identity would shock the entire Millbrook police department and send ripples of consequence far beyond their small city. The quiet woman who said nothing while they arrested her was about to teach them a lesson about assumptions, authority, and the dangerous game of jumping to conclusions. The backup that was racing toward their location carried with it the truth that would transform this moment of supposed victory into an unforgettable catastrophe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wonder where you're watching this story unfold from today. Maybe you're in a bustling metropolis like Chicago, watching from your office during a lunch break. Or perhaps you're in a quiet suburb in Texas, catching up on stories while your coffee grows cold. You might be viewing from the mountainous regions of Colorado, or from a cozy apartment in Maine where the autumn leaves are just beginning to turn. Wherever you are across this vast country of ours, I'm certain you've witnessed a moment when someone was judged too quickly, when appearances deceived, and when assumptions led to embarrassing consequences. We've all been there, haven't we? That uncomfortable moment when we realize we've misjudged someone based on their appearance, their age, their quiet demeanor, or simply because they didn't fit into the neat little box we had prepared for them in our minds. Perhaps you've seen it happen at work. The quiet janitor who turned out to have a PhD, or the soft-spoken new employee who revolutionized an entire department. Maybe you've witnessed it in your neighborhood. The elderly woman everyone underestimated who organized the most successful community fundraiser in years. Or the teenager dismissed as trouble who ended up saving someone's life. But how often do we see this kind of misjudgment happen to our law enforcement officers themselves? How frequently do we witness the tables turned so dramatically that it forces an entire community to question everything they thought they knew about authority, respect, and the danger of making snap decisions? The truth is, in our modern world of instant information and social media justice, we've become accustomed to forming opinions in seconds, making judgments in moments, and moving on to the next story before we ever learn the full truth. What you're about to discover is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about first impressions. It's a tale that unfolds in the heart of Middle America, in a city where everyone knows everyone, where reputations are built over decades and can be shattered in minutes. This is a story about the dangerous space between what we see and what we know, between what appears to be true and what actually is true. The woman sitting silently in that patrol car represents something we all fear: being misunderstood, being judged by our appearance rather than our actions, being reduced to a single moment that doesn't define who we truly are. But she also represents something else entirely: the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are, regardless of what others believe about you. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes from experience, from having faced real challenges, and emerged stronger, from understanding that temporary misunderstandings pale in comparison to genuine trials. In a world where everyone seems eager to share their story, to broadcast their achievements, to demand recognition for their accomplishments, there's something almost revolutionary about someone who chooses silence. Someone who doesn't feel the need to defend themselves immediately, who doesn't scramble to correct every misconception, who trusts that the truth will eventually emerge on its own timeline. This story takes place in an era where body cameras capture every interaction, where civilian phones record every public moment, where social media amplifies every mistake and every triumph. It's a time when police officers are under unprecedented scrutiny, when every decision is analyzed and every action is debated. Yet it's also a time when the fundamental human tendency to judge quickly and ask questions later remains as strong as ever. Colonel Elena Rodriguez, her real rank and the name she had carried for over 2 decades, had served as the youngest female battalion commander in the United States Army Special Operations Command. Her service record read like something from a military thriller: 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and numerous classified missions in locations that couldn't be discussed even years after her retirement. She had led over 800 soldiers through some of the most dangerous operations of the modern military era, earning their respect not through intimidation or politics, but through a combination of tactical brilliance and genuine care for the lives. Under her command, the transformation from Colonel Rodriguez to civilian Elena had begun 5 years earlier with what the military euphemistically called an incident. During her final deployment, Elena had been tasked with leading a joint operation to extract a kidnapped diplomat from a heavily fortified compound in a region that officially didn't exist on any mission logs. The operation required split-second decisions under impossible circumstances, with incomplete intelligence and political pressures that prioritized speed over safety. Elena had made the call to abort the mission when her reconnaissance revealed that the compound contained not just enemy combatants but also civilian hostages, including children. Her decision to prioritize civilian lives over diplomatic convenience had saved dozens of innocent people, but it had also allowed the diplomat to be moved to another location where rescue became impossible. The diplomat was eventually executed in a propaganda video that made international headlines, and Elena found herself at the center of a political firestorm that stretched from the Pentagon to Capitol Hill. The inquiry that followed lasted 8 months. Elena was cleared of any wrongdoing. Every military expert who reviewed the case agreed that her decision had been tactically sound and morally justified. But the psychological toll of having her judgment questioned, her integrity attacked, and her career dissected by politicians who had never worn a uniform proved more devastating than any enemy fire she had faced in combat. The woman who had fearlessly led soldiers through the most dangerous battlefields in the world found herself struggling with panic attacks, triggered by the sound of ringing phones and the sight of television cameras. The breaking point came during a congressional hearing where a senator, playing to the cameras, accused Elena of being too emotional to make the hard decisions required in military leadership. The accusation was particularly galling because Elena had built her career on precisely the opposite reputation. She was known throughout the military as someone who could maintain ice-cold composure under the most extreme pressure. That evening, alone in her quarters at Fort Braxton, Elena made the decision that would reshape the rest of her life. She would retire from the military and disappear into civilian anonymity. Her father, Sergeant Major Ricardo Rodriguez, had died 2 years before Elena's final deployment. A career non-commissioned officer who had served in Vietnam, he had been Elena's inspiration for military service and her strongest supporter throughout her rise through the ranks. Ricardo had taught his daughter that true leadership meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and that a soldier's highest duty was to the innocent, not to politicians or policymakers. His death from cancer had left Elena feeling unmoored, and when the political attacks began, she often found herself wishing she could seek his counsel one more time. In the darkest moments of the congressional inquiry, Elena would hold her father's Purple Heart, the only possession of his she had kept, and remember his words. Mia, when the politicians start talking about honor, you remember what real honor looks like. It's doing the right thing when no one is watching, and accepting the consequences when everyone is. Those words had sustained her through the hearings, but they had also convinced her that her time in uniform had come to an end, that the decision to become a trauma counselor hadn't been random. During her recovery from the psychological wounds inflicted by the inquiry, Elena had worked with Dr. James Patterson, a former military psychiatrist who had helped her understand that her experiences, both the combat trauma and the political persecution, had given her unique insights into the struggles faced by other veterans. Dr. Patterson suggested that Elena's combination of leadership, experience, and personal trauma recovery made her particularly well suited to help other veterans navigate their own transitions to civilian life. You understand something that most therapists can't, Dr. Patterson had told her during one of their sessions. You know what it's like to have your entire identity stripped away, to go from being respected and valued to being questioned and attacked. But you also know what it's like to lead people through impossible situations and bring them home safely. That combination of vulnerability and strength is exactly what struggling veterans need to see. Elena's move to Millbrook had been carefully planned. She needed a place where no one knew her story, where she could rebuild her sense of self without the weight of her military reputation or the shadow of political controversy. She had chosen the small Midwestern city precisely because it was unremarkable, a place where she could blend in while doing meaningful work helping other veterans who, like herself, were struggling to find purpose after leaving the military. Irony wasn't lost on Elena that she had spent years training soldiers to maintain operational security, to blend into civilian populations, to gather intelligence without revealing their true identities. Now she was using those same skills not for military purposes, but for personal healing. The discipline that had made her an exceptional military leader, the ability to compartmentalize emotions, to focus on mission objectives, to maintain composure under pressure, served her equally well in her new role as a trauma counselor. Every morning when Elena looked in the bathroom mirror, she saw both versions of herself, the decorated colonel who had commanded respect from generals and senators, and the quiet civilian who had found peace in anonymity. The transition hadn't been easy. There were days when she missed the clarity of military hierarchy, the sense of purpose that came with clear missions, and the camaraderie of soldiers who understood the weight of command. But there were also moments of profound satisfaction when she helped a veteran overcome a panic attack, or when she watched someone who had felt lost and forgotten rediscover their sense of worth. Elena kept her father's Purple Heart in the fireproof safe along with her own commendations, but she carried his memory with her every day in the work she did. Each veteran she counseled was someone's son or daughter, someone who had served their country and deserved to find peace in civilian life. In helping them heal, Elena was honoring both her father's legacy and her own commitment to protecting those who had sacrificed for others. The woman who had once led soldiers into battle was now leading them out of the psychological warfare that followed them home. Detective Luis Moreno had always believed that respect was something you took, not something you earned. At 45, he had spent the last 15 years with the Millbrook Police Department, building a reputation as the kind of cop who got results, regardless of whether those results came through careful investigation or aggressive intimidation. Standing 6 feet tall with a stocky build that he maintained through irregular gym visits and a diet heavy on coffee and fast food, Moreno commanded attention through sheer physical presence and an attitude that dared anyone to question his authority. Moreno's office at the Millbrook Police Department was a shrine to his own perceived importance. The walls were covered with commendations, some legitimate, others more ceremonial than meaningful, along with photographs of himself with local politicians, business leaders, and fellow officers. His desk was positioned so that anyone entering the room would have to look up at him. A psychological power play he had learned from watching too many police procedural shows. The nameplate on his desk read Detective Luis Moreno, 15 years of service. Though those 15 years had been marked more by expedient shortcuts than thorough police work, the culture that Moreno had helped create within the department was one where quick arrests mattered more than accurate investigations, where closing cases took precedence over ensuring justice, and where challenging authority was seen as a threat to the thin blue line that supposedly held society together. Younger officers like Ryan Kellerman looked up to Moreno not because of his investigative skills, but because of his confidence and his ability to navigate the political complexities of small-town law enforcement. Moreno had risen to detective, not through exceptional police work, but through a combination of political networking and his willingness to take credit for successes, while deflecting blame for failures. His arrest record was impressive on paper, but a closer examination would have revealed a troubling pattern of charges that didn't stick, evidence that didn't hold up in court, and suspects who were often released due to procedural errors or lack of supporting evidence. However, in a department that valued statistics over substance, Moreno's numbers looked good in annual reports and budget presentations. The power structure that enabled Moreno's behavior began at the top with Chief Walter Briggs, a 28-year veteran who had grown tired of political pressure and media scrutiny. Briggs had adopted a management philosophy of supporting his officers publicly while privately hoping that problems would resolve themselves without reaching his desk. This hands-off approach had created an environment where aggressive officers like Moreno felt emboldened to push boundaries, knowing that administrative support would be forthcoming as long as they avoided major scandals. Captain Janet Fisher, Moreno's immediate supervisor, represented the department's old guard, cops, who had joined the force when community policing meant knowing everyone's name and police brutality was something that happened in big cities, not small Midwestern towns. Fisher had watched the profession change around her, becoming more militarized and confrontational, but she had adapted by focusing on paperwork and procedure rather than questioning the methods her detectives employed. As long as reports were filed correctly and overtime was kept within budget, Fisher was content to let her detectives handle cases as they saw fit. Officer Ryan Kellerman, at 28, represented the newest generation of Millbrook police officers. Fresh out of the police academy with a criminal justice degree from State University, Kellerman had joined the force with genuine intentions of serving and protecting his community. However, his idealism had been gradually eroded by the department's culture and Moreno's mentorship, which emphasized survival and advancement over ethical considerations. Kellerman had learned that questioning senior officers was a career-limiting move, and that going along with questionable decisions was the price of acceptance within the department's social hierarchy. The broader community of Millbrook had unwittingly contributed to this toxic culture by demanding quick solutions to complex problems and by accepting police explanations without asking difficult questions. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Herald, maintained a cozy relationship with the police department, printing press releases as news stories and avoiding investigative reporting that might upset advertisers or political supporters. Editor Tom Bradshaw, a former city council member, believed that supporting local law enforcement meant never questioning their methods or motives. Moreno's network of enablers extended beyond the police department to include local prosecutors, who relied on police testimony to maintain their conviction rates, judges who trusted police officers more than defendants, and business leaders who valued order over justice. District Attorney Patricia Henley had built her career on being tough on crime, which in practice meant accepting police versions of events without demanding corroborating evidence. This symbiotic relationship meant that even when Moreno's cases fell apart, there were rarely consequences for the investigative shortcuts that led to those failures. The social dynamics within the police department reinforced Moreno's authority through both formal and informal mechanisms. Junior officers were assigned to work with senior detectives like Moreno, learning not just investigative techniques but also unwritten rules about loyalty, hierarchy, and the importance of presenting a united front against outside criticism. Officer training emphasized officer safety above all else, creating a mindset where potential threats were everywhere and aggressive responses were always justified. Moreno's personal relationships within the community further insulated him from accountability. He was a regular at Murphy's Tavern, where off-duty officers gathered to complain about bureaucracy and share war stories. The tavern's owner, Mike Murphy, was a former police officer himself who maintained strong connections to active duty personnel. These informal gatherings served as an echo chamber where questionable police actions were rationalized and criticism was dismissed as the whining of criminals and liberal activists. The detective's family life reflected his authoritarian approach to relationships. His wife, Carmen, had learned years ago not to question his work stories or challenge his version of events. Their 2 teenage children maintained respectful distance from their father, having learned that disagreement was interpreted as disrespect and that household rules were enforced with the same rigidity he brought to police work. Moreno's parenting style emphasized obedience over understanding, control over communication. Moreno's view of civilians was shaped by years of dealing primarily with people in crisis, crime victims, suspects, witnesses to traumatic events. This limited exposure had created a worldview where ordinary citizens were either potential victims who needed protection or potential criminals who required surveillance. The idea that someone might possess expertise, authority, or experience that exceeded his own was foreign too. Moreno's understanding of social hierarchy, the technology available to the Millbrook Police Department, reflected both the possibilities and limitations of modern law enforcement. Body cameras had been implemented following a federal grant, but their use was inconsistent and footage review was sporadic. The department's computer systems allowed for quick database searches and communication with other agencies, but officers, like Moreno, often relied on instinct and experience rather than thorough research when making arrest decisions. This combination of individual psychology, institutional culture, and community dynamics had created the perfect environment for the kind of mistake that was about to unfold. Moreno's confidence in his own judgment, supported by a system that rarely challenged his decisions, would collide with a reality that none of his experience had prepared him to handle. The quiet woman he was about to arrest represented everything his worldview couldn't accommodate: authority that didn't announce itself, competence that didn't seek recognition, and a strength that operated according to principles he had never learned to recognize or respect. The first encounter between Detective Moreno and Elena Rodriguez had occurred 3 weeks before the arrest, during what should have been a routine community outreach event at the Millbrook Community Health Center. The police department had organized a presentation on personal safety for the center's clients, many of whom were veterans struggling with various forms of trauma. Moreno had volunteered for the assignment, seeing it as an easy way to pad his community service hours while demonstrating his expertise to a captive audience. Elena had been sitting quietly in the back row of the small conference room, taking notes as Moreno delivered his presentation on home security and personal protection. His approach was heavy-handed and condescending, filled with assumptions about his audience's intelligence and life experiences. "Most of you probably don't realize how dangerous this city has become," he had announced, pacing in front of the room like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. "Street crime is up 15% this year, and most victims could have avoided becoming statistics if they'd just used common sense." When Moreno opened the floor for questions, most of the veterans remained silent, accustomed to being lectured rather than engaged in meaningful dialogue. But Elena, troubled by the officer's dismissive tone, inaccurate statistics, had quietly raised her hand. "Officer, could you clarify where those crime statistics came from?" "The FBI's most recent uniform crime report shows violent crime in cities our size has actually decreased by 8% nationally." The question had caught Moreno off guard, both because it challenged his authority and because it demonstrated a level of knowledge he hadn't expected from someone he had automatically categorized as a victim rather than an informed citizen. His face had flushed slightly as he scrambled to defend statistics he had invented on the spot. "Ma'am, I think I know more about crime in my own city than some government report that lumps us in with places that are nothing like Millbrook." Elena had simply nodded and made another note, but her calm response had irritated Moreno more than an argument would have. There was something about her composure, her refusal to be intimidated or embarrassed, that struck him as insubordinate. After the presentation, he had approached Dr. Patricia Kim to ask about the woman who had questioned him. "Oh, that's Elena Rodriguez, one of our best trauma counselors," Dr. Kim had explained. "She works primarily with military veterans. Very knowledgeable about stress management and crisis intervention." That conversation had planted a seed of resentment in Moreno's mind. The idea that a civilian trauma counselor might know more about crisis situations than a police detective with 15 years of experience was unacceptable to his worldview. He had begun paying attention to Elena's routine, noticing her daily walks through Riverside Park, her Saturday grocery shopping trips, her quiet presence at community events. Not as part of any official investigation, but as a way of proving to himself that she was exactly what she appeared to be, an ordinary civilian who had gotten lucky with one pointed question. The second encounter had occurred the following week at Morrison's grocery store, where Elena was shopping for her weekly supplies. Moreno happened to be in the store picking up coffee for the station when he noticed Elena in the produce section, carefully selecting vegetables with the kind of attention to detail that suggested a limited budget. He had approached her with what he considered friendly curiosity, but which came across as territorial intimidation. "Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it?" he had said, positioning himself between Elena and her shopping cart. "I've been thinking about your question from last week. You seem to know a lot about crime statistics for someone who works with therapy patients." His tone suggested that this knowledge was somehow suspicious, as if civilian awareness of public information represented a challenge to police authority. Elena had continued selecting produce while responding politely. "I think it's important for counselors to understand the actual risks our clients face, rather than relying on perception or assumption." Her voice remained calm and professional, but Moreno detected what he interpreted as condescension. The fact that she didn't seem impressed by his badge or intimidated by his presence further irritated him. "Well, statistics are one thing," Moreno had replied, moving closer to invade her personal space. "But actual experience dealing with criminals is something else entirely. I've arrested more violent offenders in the last year than most people see in a lifetime." He was attempting to establish dominance through what he considered superior credentials, but Elena's response had been simply to nod and continue shopping. The brief interaction had ended when Elena politely excused herself to finish her shopping, leaving Moreno standing in the produce section, feeling like he had somehow lost an exchange he couldn't quite define. Her refusal to engage with his implied challenges, her professional composure in the face of his obvious attempts at intimidation, and her general air of quiet confidence had left him feeling unsettled and defensive. Over the following 2 weeks, Moreno had found himself unconsciously looking for Elena during his patrol shifts, noting her predictable routines and filing away details about her behavior. Not because he suspected her of any wrongdoing, but because something about her triggered his need to categorize and control. She represented a type of civilian he rarely encountered, Someone who was neither deferential to his authority nor openly hostile to it, but simply unimpressed by it. Officer Kellerman had noticed his partner's unusual interest in the quiet trauma counselor. "Everything okay with that woman from the health center?" he had asked during one of their patrol shifts. "You seem to watch her pretty closely when we drive through that area." Moreno had dismissed the observation with a wave of his hand. "Just keeping an eye on the neighborhood. Part of good community policing." But the truth was more complex. Elena's calm confidence reminded Moreno of military officers he had encountered during joint training exercises early in his career. People who possessed an inner authority that didn't depend on uniforms, badges, or official recognition. This type of quiet leadership made him uncomfortable because it highlighted the difference between authority that was earned through competence and authority that was asserted through position. The pattern that had emerged from these early encounters was telling. Moreno approached each interaction with Elena as a test of dominance, expecting deference or at least acknowledgement of his superior position in the social hierarchy. Elena responded with professional courtesy, but without the submission he expected from civilians. Her refusal to be intimidated or impressed wasn't confrontational. It was simply irrelevant to her, as if his attempts at dominance were happening in a language she didn't speak. This dynamic had created a psychological itch that Moreno couldn't scratch. Elena represented everything his worldview couldn't accommodate: competence without arrogance, knowledge without the need for recognition, and confidence that didn't require external validation. Her very existence challenged his understanding of how authority worked in civilian society, suggesting that there might be forms of leadership and expertise that operated outside the hierarchies he understood and controlled. By the time the bank robbery occurred on that fateful Saturday afternoon, Moreno had already developed a mental file on Elena Rodriguez that painted her as someone who needed to be brought down to size. When the description of the robbery suspect came across police radio, brown hair, medium build, gray jacket, Moreno's mind immediately jumped to the woman who had questioned his authority and refused to be intimidated by his presence. The arrest wouldn't just solve a crime. It would prove that his instincts about people were correct, and that Elena's apparent confidence was nothing more than civilian naivety about the real world of crime and punishment. After the arrest at Riverside Park, what began as a case of mistaken identity quickly transformed into a systematic campaign of harassment that revealed the darker aspects of small-town power dynamics. Elena's booking at the Millbrook police station became an exercise in deliberate humiliation, orchestrated by Detective Moreno and enabled by a system that valued officer solidarity over procedural fairness. The booking process, which should have taken no more than 2 hours, stretched into an 8-hour ordeal. Elena was placed in a holding cell with a broken toilet and no access to water for the first 4 hours, despite her polite requests for basic amenities. When she asked to make her legally mandated phone call, Sergeant Davis at the front desk claimed the phone system was temporarily down, a lie that would later be exposed when security footage showed other arrestees making calls throughout the same period. Detective Moreno had orchestrated these delays with calculated precision. He instructed the booking officers to process Elena's paperwork thoroughly, which in practice meant repeating routine procedures multiple times and requiring supervisory approval for standard forms. "We want to make sure we dot every I and cross every T on this one," he told Officer Martinez, the booking supervisor. "Bank robbery is serious business, and we can't afford any procedural mistakes." The humiliation extended beyond bureaucratic delays. Elena's personal belongings were searched with unnecessary thoroughness, with items being examined and discussed loudly enough for other officers to hear. Her simple gray jacket was tested for gunpowder residue multiple times, each test requiring her to stand with arms outstretched for extended periods. The booking photograph session was repeated 5 times, with officers claiming technical difficulties with the camera equipment that seemed to function perfectly for other arrestees. During the fingerprinting process, Officer Jennifer Walsh accidentally smeared the ink, requiring the procedure to be repeated multiple times. Each repetition involved harsh scrubbing to remove the previous ink, leaving Elena's fingertips raw and stained. "Sorry about that," Walsh said with a smirk that contradicted her apologetic words. "Sometimes the equipment doesn't cooperate with difficult suspects." The medical examination required for all arrestees became another opportunity for systematic harassment. Nurse Patricia Holmes, who had worked with the police department for over a decade, conducted the examination with unnecessary roughness and inappropriate commentary. "You don't look like a bank robber," she mused while checking Elena's blood pressure with a cuff that was deliberately too tight. "But I suppose you never can tell with people these days. Desperation makes folks do crazy things." Elena's request for a public defender was met with additional obstacles. The duty attorney, Robert Chen, was told that Elena had declined representation. Another deliberate fabrication that left her without legal counsel for the critical first hours of her detention. When Chen finally arrived at the station after receiving a call from Elena's supervisor at the health center, he was told that his client was being processed and wouldn't be available for consultation until the following morning. The interrogation room where Elena was eventually taken had been deliberately overheated, with the thermostat set to 85 degrees and the ventilation system mysteriously malfunctioning. Detective Moreno and Officer Kellerman took turns questioning her over a 4-hour period, repeating the same questions and expressing theatrical disbelief at her consistent denials. "Come on, Elena," Moreno said, using her first name without permission in an attempt to establish false intimacy. "We know you did it. Just tell us why, and we can work something out." The questioning tactics violated numerous procedural guidelines. Elena was denied food and water during the interrogation, despite regulations requiring breaks every 2 hours. The recording equipment malfunctioned during key portions of the session, creating gaps in the official record that would later raise serious questions about police conduct. When Elena requested to speak with her attorney, Moreno claimed that Chen had gone home for the day and wouldn't return until Monday morning. Meanwhile, news of Elena's arrest had spread throughout the small community with remarkable speed. The Millbrook Herald's crime reporter, Jessica Turner, received what appeared to be an anonymous tip about the bank robbery arrest, complete with details that could only have come from someone with access to police files. Turner's article, published on the newspaper's website within hours of Elena's arrest, included Elena's full name, her workplace, and speculation about her financial difficulties that painted her as a desperate woman driven to crime by mounting bills. The article's publication triggered a cascade of social media harassment directed at Elena and her workplace. The Millbrook Community Health Center's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments demanding Elena's immediate termination. "How can you employ criminals to counsel our veterans?" wrote one user. "This woman is a disgrace to everyone who served our country honorably." The center's phone lines were jammed with calls from community members expressing outrage and demanding answers. Dr. Patricia Kim found herself in an impossible position. The center's board of directors, responding to public pressure and concerns about federal funding, placed enormous pressure on her to suspend Elena immediately. "We can't have someone charged with a felony representing our organization," board Chairman Thomas Morrison declared during an emergency phone conference. "Think about how this looks to our donors and the Department of Veterans Affairs." Elena's colleagues at the health center were divided in their response. Some, like Dr. Sarah Williams, defended Elena's character and questioned the circumstances of her arrest. "This doesn't make sense," Williams told anyone who would listen. "Elena is the most ethical person I know. Something isn't right about this whole situation." But others, concerned about their own job security, distanced themselves from Elena and avoided any public statements of support that the harassment extended to Elena's personal life in ways that went far beyond normal police procedure. Her landlord, Mr. Garrett, received what he later described as unofficial visits from police officers who expressed concerns about having a dangerous criminal living in his property. While no formal action was taken, the implied threat was clear enough that Garrett began proceedings to terminate Elena's lease. Citing a morality clause in the rental agreement, Elena's neighbors on Maple Street found themselves subject to informal questioning by officers who claimed to be conducting a routine neighborhood security check. Mrs. Henderson was asked detailed questions about Elena's daily routines, her visitors, and any suspicious behavior she might have observed. "They made it sound like I was helping solve a major crime," Henderson later recalled. But the questions seemed designed to make Elena look guilty of something. The systematic nature of the harassment became evident in the coordination between different institutions. Elena's bank account was flagged for suspicious activity monitoring, despite no evidence of financial irregularities. Her car was ticketed twice in 2 days for parking violations that other residents routinely ignored. The community center, where she occasionally attended evening lectures, received anonymous complaints about Elena's presence, leading to uncomfortable conversations about whether she should be banned from public events. Dr. Martinez, Elena's physician, received a call from someone claiming to be conducting a background check for Elena's employment. The caller asked detailed questions about Elena's mental health, medication history, and any signs of stress or desperation that might indicate criminal tendencies. While Dr. Martinez refused to provide any information, the call itself represented a violation of Elena's privacy that added another layer to the systematic campaign against her. The cumulative effect of these coordinated efforts was to isolate Elena from her support systems and create an atmosphere where her guilt was assumed rather than proven. Every aspect of her carefully constructed civilian life came under scrutiny, with ordinary activities reinterpreted as evidence of criminal behavior. Her quiet demeanor was described as suspicious, her privacy was labeled secretive, and her professional competence was reframed as evidence that she was manipulative enough to commit sophisticated crimes. By the end of her first week in custody, Elena had become a pariah in the community she had quietly served for 3 years. The systematic harassment had achieved its intended effect, transforming a respected professional into a social outcast, while demonstrating the power of institutional coordination when directed against an individual who lacked the resources to fight back effectively. What Moreno and his enablers didn't realize was that they had just declared war on someone whose training and experience in handling systematic oppression far exceeded anything their small-town power structure could imagine. The turning point came on Tuesday morning of Elena's second week in custody, when an unexpected call arrived at the Millbrook Police Department that would transform a local controversy into a federal investigation. The call came through the main switchboard at 8:47 a.m., with the caller identifying himself as General Marcus Thompson, Deputy Commander of the United States Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the Elena Rodriguez case." General Thompson's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "This is a matter of national security, and I need information about one of my former officers." The desk sergeant, confused by the unexpected call, transferred the general to Captain Fisher, who found herself completely unprepared for what she was about to hear. General Thompson's inquiry was direct and alarming. "Captain Fisher, I'm calling because Colonel Elena Rodriguez's name has appeared in our security monitoring systems as being involved in a criminal investigation. This is highly irregular, as Colonel Rodriguez holds active security clearances and has been involved in classified operations that require ongoing oversight. I need to understand immediately what charges have been filed and under what circumstances." Captain Fisher felt her stomach drop as she struggled to process the general's words. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion. The Elena Rodriguez we have in custody is a civilian trauma counselor. She's been charged with bank robbery, and I can assure you there's been no military involvement in this case." The silence that followed her explanation stretched for nearly 30 seconds, before General Thompson responded with carefully controlled anger. "Captain, I'm going to ask you to repeat that statement, because what you just told me suggests that the Millbrook Police Department has arrested and is currently holding one of the United States Army's most decorated Special Operations commanders on charges of robbing a bank." General Thompson's voice had taken on a quality that made Captain Fisher's hands shake as she held the phone. "Colonel Rodriguez retired from active duty 5 years ago, but she maintains top-secret security clearances and serves as a consultant on classified projects. Her fingerprints and identification are flagged in federal databases specifically to prevent exactly this kind of situation." The revelation hit Captain Fisher like a physical blow. She immediately pulled Elena's booking file, scanning through paperwork that suddenly looked woefully inadequate. The standard background check that Officer Martinez had run showed no military service, no federal flags, and no indication that Elena Rodriguez was anyone other than the civilian trauma counselor she appeared to be. "General, our standard databases showed no military background. How is that possible?" General Thompson's explanation was both enlightening and terrifying. "Colonel Rodriguez's service record is classified above your department's clearance level. Her identity is protected under federal protocols designed to safeguard personnel who have been involved in sensitive operations. The fact that your background check didn't flag her identity means someone in your department failed to follow proper procedures for arrestees with federal connections." As Captain Fisher absorbed this information, General Thompson continued with details that made the situation even more serious. "Colonel Rodriguez led classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq that saved hundreds of American lives. She has been personally decorated by 3 presidents and holds the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit. She retired under circumstances related to classified operations, and her current location and activities are monitored by federal agencies for her own protection as well as national security." The general's next words sent a chill through Captain Fisher's entire body. "Captain, I need you to understand something very clearly. Colonel Rodriguez has been illegally detained by your department for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, her absence from scheduled federal consultations has triggered security protocols that now involve multiple government agencies. The FBI's Counterintelligence Division, the Department of Defense Inspector General, and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division are all now aware of this situation." General Thompson's voice took on an even more ominous tone as he continued. "Furthermore, Captain, the systematic harassment that Colonel Rodriguez has endured while in your custody has been documented through multiple channels. Federal agencies have been monitoring local media coverage, social media activity, and communications related to this case. What your department has done to one of America's most distinguished military officers constitutes a federal civil rights violation and potentially a national security breach." The implications of General Thompson's words were staggering. Captain Fisher realized that what had seemed like a routine bank robbery case had somehow become a federal incident involving multiple government agencies and a decorated military officer whose identity had been hidden from local law enforcement. "General, what do you need from us immediately?" "I need Colonel Rodriguez released from custody within the next 2 hours," General Thompson replied without hesitation. "I need all charges dropped immediately, and I need a full report on every aspect of her treatment while in your custody. Most importantly, Captain, I need to speak directly with whoever made the decision to arrest her, because that person is about to become the subject of a federal investigation." As Captain Fisher hung up the phone, she realized that Detective Moreno's confident arrest had just triggered a chain of events that would expose the Millbrook Police Department to federal scrutiny and potential prosecution. The woman they had dismissed as a desperate bank robber was actually a decorated military hero whose mistreatment had caught the attention of the highest levels of government. Within minutes of ending the call with General Thompson, Captain Fisher's phone rang again. This time it was FBI Special Agent Sarah Collins from the Chicago field office, requesting immediate access to Elena Rodriguez and all documentation related to her arrest and detention. Captain Fisher, we're initiating a federal civil rights investigation based on preliminary information about the treatment of a retired military officer in your custody. Agent Collins's tone was professional but stern as she outlined the federal government's immediate requirements. We need complete access to all booking records, interrogation transcripts, medical examination reports, and any other documentation related to Miss Rodriguez's treatment. We also need to interview every officer who had contact with her during her detention. The third call came from Department of Justice Attorney Michael Barnes, who informed Captain Fisher that the Civil Rights Division was opening a formal investigation into potential violations of Elena's constitutional rights. Captain, based on preliminary reports, it appears that Miss Rodriguez may have been subjected to deliberately harsh treatment that violates federal civil rights statutes. We'll be sending investigators to Millbrook within 24 hours. As news of the federal involvement spread through the police department, the atmosphere shifted from confident authority to panicked damage control. Officers who had participated in Elena's harassment suddenly found themselves facing the possibility of federal prosecution. Detective Moreno, who had orchestrated much of this systematic mistreatment, was summoned to Chief Briggs's office for an emergency meeting that would determine whether he still had a career in law enforcement. The local media, which had eagerly reported Elena's arrest and the community's outrage, now found themselves scrambling to understand how they had gotten the story so wrong. Jessica Turner, the crime reporter who had published the initial article about Elena's arrest, received a call from her editor, demanding an immediate investigation into her sources and the accuracy of her reporting. Dr. Patricia Kim at the Community Health Center received a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs informing her that one of the federal government's most valued consultants on veteran trauma had been illegally detained by local police. The VA official's message was clear: the health center's federal funding was now at risk because of their treatment of Elena during her detention. Elena herself remained in her cell, unaware that her military identity had been discovered and that the full weight of the federal government was now focused on her case. She had maintained her silence throughout the ordeal, neither confirming nor denying the charges against her, trusting that the truth would eventually emerge. What she couldn't have anticipated was that her former commander would discover her situation through routine security monitoring and mobilize the resources necessary to expose the injustice she had endured. The catalyst that would transform Elena from suspected criminal to vindicated hero was now in motion. But the revelation of her true identity would come not through her own choice, but through the protective mechanisms built into the federal system to safeguard those who had served their country with distinction. The quiet woman who had said nothing while they arrested her was about to be revealed as someone whose silence had been a choice, not a weakness, and whose true authority far exceeded anything the Millbrook Police Department had ever encountered. Next 6 hours transformed the Millbrook Police Department from a confident law enforcement agency into a scene of barely controlled chaos as federal officials descended on the small city like an occupying force. Elena remained in her cell, still unaware that her identity had been discovered, while around her a complex military and federal operation unfolded with the precision of a Special Operations Mission. FBI Special Agent Sarah Collins arrived at 2:15 p.m. in a black SUV, accompanied by 2 additional agents and a Department of Justice attorney. Their first stop was not the police station, but rather a secure conference room at the federal courthouse 30 miles away in the state capital, where they established a command center complete with encrypted communication equipment and direct lines to Washington, D.C. The message was clear. This was no longer a local police matter. Agent Collins's first meeting with Chief Briggs lasted exactly 17 minutes and resulted in the immediate suspension of Detective Moreno and Officer Kellerman pending federal investigation. Chief Briggs, Agent Collins had stated with clinical precision, "You need to understand that Colonel Rodriguez's detention has triggered protocols established after 9/11s to protect military personnel involved in classified operations. Every minute she remains in custody without proper federal oversight constitutes a potential national security violation." While federal agents secured Elena's case files and began interviewing officers, a parallel operation was taking shape at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. General Thompson had activated what the military called a personnel recovery protocol, the same type of operation typically used to extract captured or endangered service members from hostile territory. The irony was not lost on the general that this particular extraction was taking place in a small American city rather than a foreign combat zone. Colonel James Mitchell, Elena's former deputy commander and current head of Special Operations Personnel Security, was dispatched to Millbrook with a team of military investigators and a stack of classified documents that would officially establish Elena's identity and service record. Mitchell had served under Elena during 2 deployments and considered her one of the finest officers he had ever known. The idea that she had been subjected to systematic harassment while in civilian custody filled him with a cold rage that he channeled into methodical preparation for her vindication. At the Millbrook Community Health Center, Dr. Patricia Kim found herself fielding calls from federal officials who were conducting their own investigation into Elena's background and professional competence. A Department of Veterans Affairs investigator arrived to review Elena's case files and interview her colleagues, revealing for the first time the extraordinary success rate she had achieved with the most difficult veteran cases. "Dr. Rodriguez's methods are unlike anything we've seen," the investigator reported to his superiors. "Her understanding of military trauma appears to be based on personal experience rather than just academic training." The local media, which had been so eager to report Elena's arrest and the community's outrage, now found themselves scrambling to understand a story that was rapidly spiraling beyond their comprehension. Jessica Turner, the crime reporter whose initial article had helped fuel the public harassment campaign, received a visit from FBI agents who informed her that she was now part of a federal investigation into civil rights violations. The agents' questions made it clear that Turner's sources within the police department had provided her with information that should never have been released to the public. Meanwhile, the real bank robber, a desperate drug addict named Marcus Webb, who had fled to a neighboring state immediately after the crime, was arrested by state police following a routine traffic stop. Webb's confession, delivered to state investigators who were unaware of Elena's situation, included details about the robbery that clearly established his guilt and Elena's complete innocence. The confession was immediately forwarded to federal authorities, providing the final piece of evidence needed to demonstrate the complete failure of the Millbrook Police Department's investigation. As afternoon turned to evening, Elena remained in her cell, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had characterized her entire ordeal. She had requested nothing beyond basic necessities, made no demands for special treatment, and continued to respond to questions with the same measured silence that had frustrated her interrogators. What her captors didn't understand was that Elena's silence wasn't born of guilt or fear, but of a discipline learned through years of military training in situations where revealing information could compromise missions and endanger lives. Officer Martinez, who had processed Elena's initial booking, found himself being questioned by federal agents about every aspect of her treatment. As he reviewed his own reports under federal scrutiny, Martinez began to realize the magnitude of what had occurred. She never complained about anything, he told Agent Collins during his interview. Even when the booking process took longer than normal, even when the cell facilities weren't working properly, she just accepted it all without protest. I've never seen anything like it. The revelation that would transform everything was being carefully orchestrated by Colonel Mitchell, who understood that Elena's vindication needed to be both complete and public to counteract the damage done by her wrongful arrest. Federal protocols required that her military identity be revealed in a manner that protected classified information while demonstrating the severity of the injustice she had endured. At 6:30 p.m., a convoy of federal vehicles arrived at the Millbrook Police Department. The convoy included FBI agents, military investigators, Department of Justice officials, and a specialized military team whose presence indicated the highest levels of federal involvement. Local television news crews, alerted by tips from federal sources, gathered outside the police station to witness what they had been told would be a significant development in the Elena Rodriguez case. Inside the police station, Chief Briggs received a call from the state Attorney General's office informing him that the state was taking immediate control of the Elena Rodriguez case and that federal authorities would be assuming responsibility for her custody and release. The call was followed by formal paperwork that effectively removed the case from local jurisdiction and placed it under federal oversight. Detective Moreno, already suspended and facing potential federal prosecution, watched from the parking lot as federal officials entered the building where he had spent 15 years building what he thought was a respectable career. The woman he had dismissed as a desperate civilian was about to be revealed as someone whose service to the country far exceeded anything he had ever accomplished, and whose mistreatment at his hands would likely end his law enforcement career forever. Elena's colleagues from the community health center had gathered outside the police station after receiving word that federal officials were involved in her case. Dr. Patricia Kim stood with Dr. Sarah Williams and several other staff members, all of them struggling to understand how the quiet, competent trauma counselor they knew could have become the center of such an extraordinary federal response. The stage was now set for a revelation that would transform Elena from suspected criminal to vindicated hero in a matter of minutes. Federal officials had assembled the evidence. Military personnel had confirmed her identity and service record, and media representatives were positioned to document her release and the exposure of the injustice she had endured. What was about to unfold would not just vindicate Elena Rodriguez personally, but would serve as a powerful demonstration of how dangerous it could be to judge people based on appearances, assumptions, and prejudices. The quiet woman who had said nothing while they arrested her was about to remind an entire community about the hidden heroes who walk among us, serving their country in ways that most civilians never see or understand. The federal machinery that protected America's most valued military personnel was now focused entirely on one small police station in Millbrook, where a decorated colonel had been treated like a common criminal by officers who had never learned to recognize true authority. When it chose to remain silent. At 7:45 p.m., the steel door of Elena's holding cell opened for the final time. What she expected to see was Detective Moreno or Officer Kellerman coming to continue their futile interrogation. What she saw instead was Colonel James Mitchell, her former deputy commander, standing in full dress uniform with an expression of barely controlled fury and profound respect. "Colonel Rodriguez," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of military protocol, "I'm here to escort you out of this facility. Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for what you've endured. This never should have happened." Elena's calm composure flickered for just a moment as she recognized her former colleague, but she quickly regained her steady demeanor and simply nodded, understanding immediately that her carefully maintained civilian anonymity had been shattered. Behind Colonel Mitchell stood FBI Special Agent Sarah Collins, Department of Justice Attorney Michael Barnes and Chief Briggs, whose face had turned ashen as he began to comprehend the magnitude of his department's error. Elena rose from the narrow bench where she had spent countless hours in meditation-like silence, her movements displaying the same measured grace that had characterized her entire ordeal. "Colonel, if you're ready, we have some people outside who are very eager to see you," Mitchell continued, his tone making it clear that Elena's vindication would be as public as her humiliation had been. Elena nodded again, her discipline preventing her from asking the questions that must have been racing through her mind about how her identity had been discovered and what consequences would follow. The walk from Elena's cell to the front entrance of the police station became a procession of revelation that would be replayed on news broadcasts across the country for weeks to come. Word had spread through the building that the woman they had arrested for bank robbery was actually a decorated military colonel, and officers lined the hallways to witness her emergence with a mixture of curiosity, shame, and disbelief. As they reached the main lobby, Elena could see through the glass doors that a crowd had gathered outside the police station. Television news trucks lined the street, their satellite dishes extended and cameras ready to capture what federal officials had promised would be a significant development in a case that had already generated considerable local controversy. Chief Briggs, walking beside the federal officials with the reluctant pace of a man approaching his own execution, attempted to address Elena directly. "Ma'am, I want you to know that we'll be conducting a full internal investigation into how this happened. There will be consequences for the officers involved." Elena turned to look at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout her ordeal, but her eyes held a clarity that made Briggs take a step backward. "Chief Briggs," Colonel Mitchell interjected before Elena could respond, "you'll be hearing from federal investigators very soon about those consequences. What happened here constitutes multiple federal violations, and Colonel Rodriguez's treatment, while in your custody, will be thoroughly investigated by agencies with far more authority than your Internal Affairs Division." As they approached the front doors, Elena could see familiar faces in the crowd outside. Dr. Patricia Kim and several colleagues from the Community Health Center stood near the police tape, along with veterans she had counseled who had somehow learned of her situation. Their presence suggested that word of her true identity was already spreading through the community she had served so quietly for 3 years. The moment Elena stepped outside the police station, the cameras began rolling, and the questions began shouting from assembled reporters. But before any of them could approach her, Colonel Mitchell stepped forward to address the crowd with the commanding presence of a career military officer addressing troops. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell announced, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "I want to introduce you to Colonel Elena Rodriguez, United States Army Special Operations Command, retired." Colonel Rodriguez served our country with extraordinary distinction for over 20 years, leading classified operations that saved hundreds of American lives. She holds the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit, among numerous other commendations. The impact of Mitchell's words rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Reporters who had been prepared to ask questions about bank robbery charges found themselves struggling to process the revelation that they were looking at one of the military's most decorated female officers. Camera operators zoomed in on Elena's face, capturing the moment when a supposed criminal was revealed to be a national hero. Mitchell continued his presentation with military precision. "For the past 5 years, Colonel Rodriguez has served as a civilian trauma counselor, helping military veterans transition to civilian life. Her work in this capacity has been exemplary, and she has maintained active security clearances as a consultant on classified projects related to veteran welfare and military trauma recovery." Jessica Turner, the crime reporter whose initial article had helped fuel the public harassment campaign against Elena, stood frozen among the crowd of journalists, realizing that her career had just been destroyed by her own eagerness to publish. sensational accusations without proper verification. The woman she had portrayed as a desperate criminal was actually someone whose service to the country far exceeded anything Turner would ever accomplish. Dr. Patricia Kim pushed through the crowd of reporters, tears streaming down her face as she approached Elena. "Elena, I'm so sorry. We should have known. We should have supported you better." Elena's response was characteristically measured and gracious. "Dr. Kim, you had no way of knowing. You did what you thought was right based on the information available to you." But the most dramatic moment came when Detective Moreno, watching from the parking lot where he had been relegated since his suspension, found himself face to face with the woman whose authority he had never learned to recognize. Elena noticed him standing apart from the crowd and walked directly toward him, her movements drawing the attention of every camera and reporter present. Moreno stood frozen as Elena approached, his mind struggling to reconcile the decorated colonel being described by federal officials with the quiet woman he had dismissed as a civilian who needed to be put in her place. When Elena stopped directly in front of him, the crowd fell silent, sensing that they were about to witness a moment of profound confrontation. "Detective Moreno," Elena said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of authority that made everyone present understand they were hearing someone accustomed to command. "I want you to know that I don't hold personal grudges against officers who are doing what they believe to be their duty. But I hope this experience teaches you something about the dangers of making assumptions about people based on their appearance or circumstances." Moreno opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The woman he had tried to intimidate and humiliate was addressing him with the kind of professional courtesy he had never shown her, while simultaneously demonstrating a personal authority that made his own badge and uniform seem like props in a child's game. Elena turned back toward the federal officials, who were waiting to escort her away from the police station that had held her illegally for nearly 2 weeks. As she walked toward the federal vehicles, she paused to acknowledge the veterans from the health center who had come to support her. "Thank you all for being here," she said simply. "I'll see you at work next week." The revelation was complete. Elena Rodriguez had been transformed in the public eye from suspected criminal to vindicated hero in a matter of minutes. But more importantly, she had demonstrated something profound about dignity, discipline, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are, regardless of what others believe about you. As the federal convoy pulled away from the Millbrook police station, carrying Elena toward a debriefing that would detail the full extent of her mistreatment and begin the process of holding those responsible accountable, the crowd that remained behind was left to grapple with the implications of what they had witnessed. The quiet woman who had said nothing while they arrested her had just taught an entire community an unforgettable lesson about the hidden heroes who walk among us, serving their country and their communities in ways that most people never see or understand. 6 months after Elena Rodriguez walked out of the Millbrook police station as a vindicated hero, the ripple effects of her wrongful arrest continued to transform lives and institutions far beyond the small Midwestern city where it all began. The quiet woman who had endured systematic harassment with military discipline had become an unwitting catalyst for changes that would reshape how law enforcement, media, and communities approach the fundamental question of human dignity. Detective Luis Moreno's career in law enforcement ended exactly 37 days after Elena's release, when federal investigators concluded their comprehensive review of his conduct. The Department of Justice's findings were damning: systematic civil rights violations, abuse of authority, and a pattern of behavior that demonstrated unfitness for police service. Moreno's attempts to find employment with other law enforcement agencies were unsuccessful, as word of his role in the Elena Rodriguez case had spread throughout the regional police community like wildfire. But perhaps more significantly, Moreno had begun attending therapy sessions with Dr. Marcus Chun, a psychologist specializing in authority-related behavioral issues. The experience of having his fundamental assumptions about power and respect completely shattered had forced Moreno to confront aspects of his personality that he had never examined. I spent 15 years thinking that respect was something people owed me because of my badge, Moreno told Dr. Chun during one session. It never occurred to me that real authority comes from competence and character, not from the ability to intimidate people. Officer Ryan Kellerman had chosen a different path. Rather than leaving law enforcement, he had requested transfer to the department's Community Outreach Division and enrolled in advanced training on civil rights, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. The rookie officer who had blindly followed Moreno's lead now found himself speaking at police academies across the state, sharing the Elena Rodriguez case as an example of how quickly good intentions could be corrupted by toxic departmental culture. The scariest thing about what happened, Kellerman told a class of new recruits at the State Police Academy, is that we convinced ourselves we were doing the right thing. We had a suspect description, we found someone who matched it, and we made an arrest. But we never stopped to really look at who we were arresting or to question whether our assumptions were correct. Colonel Rodriguez taught me that true police work requires humility, not just authority. The Millbrook Police Department itself had undergone a complete transformation under federal oversight. Chief Walter Briggs had resigned in disgrace, replaced by Captain Maria Santos, a reform-minded leader who had implemented new policies requiring extensive background checks, federal database searches, and mandatory consultation with federal authorities for any arrest involving individuals with potential military connections. Captain Fisher, who had received the initial call from General Thompson, had been demoted, but retained her position after demonstrating genuine commitment to reform. She now served as the department's liaison to federal agencies and had developed protocols that prevented the kind of institutional blindness that had enabled Elena's mistreatment. We learned that our small-town perspective made us arrogant, Fisher reflected during a department training session. We thought we knew everything we needed to know about the people in our community, but Colonel Rodriguez proved that we knew almost nothing. The transformation extended beyond law enforcement to the media landscape that had amplified Elena's persecution. Jessica Turner, the crime reporter whose sensational article had fueled public harassment, had lost her position at the Millbrook Herald and struggled to find employment elsewhere in journalism. Her experience had become a cautionary tale in journalism schools about the dangers of publishing allegations without proper verification. The Herald itself had implemented new editorial policies requiring multiple source verification and legal review for all crime-related stories. Editor Tom Bradshaw, chastened by federal scrutiny of his publication's role in Elena's harassment, had hired an experienced investigative journalist to establish proper standards for crime reporting. We forgot that our job is to inform the public, not to entertain them with sensational accusations, Bradshaw acknowledged in a letter to readers. Elena's colleagues at the Millbrook Community Health Center had experienced their own transformation. Dr. Patricia Kim had established new protocols for supporting employees facing legal difficulties, ensuring that the center would never again abandon a colleague based solely on criminal charges. The experience had deepened the staff's understanding of how quickly public opinion could turn against someone and how important it was to maintain loyalty to proven character rather than temporary appearances. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had defended Elena during her ordeal, had been promoted to deputy director and had expanded the center's programs for military veterans. Elena's experience reminded us that many of our clients have been judged and dismissed by society, Williams explained to a conference of mental health professionals. Her dignity under pressure became a model for how we should support anyone facing unjust treatment. The veterans community had embraced Elena's story as a powerful example of military values surviving civilian challenges. Her ability to maintain discipline and composure while facing systematic persecution had resonated with veterans who had experienced their own struggles with civilian authorities who didn't understand military culture or service records. Sergeant First Class David Martinez, one of Elena's former clients, had organized a veteran support network that provided legal assistance and advocacy for military personnel facing civilian legal issues. Colonel Rodriguez showed us that military training doesn't end when you take off the uniform, Martinez told a gathering of veteran advocates. The discipline and integrity she demonstrated while being wrongfully imprisoned reminded all of us what service really means. Elena herself had returned to her work at the community health center, but with a new role as Director of Veteran Advocacy and Legal Assistance. Her experience had given her unique insights into how the civilian justice system could fail military personnel, and she had developed programs to prevent other veterans from experiencing similar mistreatment. The irony is that my arrest probably helped more veterans than 20 years of quiet counseling ever could have, Elena reflected during an interview with Military Times magazine. My case brought attention to problems that many veterans face but rarely discuss publicly. Sometimes personal trauma becomes a pathway to broader service. The legal consequences of Elena's case had extended far beyond Millbrook. The Department of Justice had used her case as the foundation for new guidelines requiring local law enforcement agencies to check federal databases before arresting individuals with potential military connections. Several other cases of military personnel being mistreated by civilian authorities had come to light as a result of the attention Elena's case had generated. General Thompson had testified before Congress about the need for better communication between military and civilian authorities, using Elena's case as an example of how lack of coordination could compromise both justice and national security. Colonel Rodriguez's case demonstrates that protecting our military personnel requires vigilance at every level of government. Thompson told the Senate Armed Services Committee the broader community of Millbrook had undergone its own process of reflection and growth. The citizens who had initially supported Elena's arrest and prosecution found themselves confronting uncomfortable questions about their own assumptions and prejudices. Many had written letters of apology to Elena, though she had graciously declined most requests for public meetings, preferring to focus on her work rather than dwelling on past injustices. Mrs. Henderson, Elena's neighbor who had been questioned by police about her activities, had become one of Elena's strongest advocates and had organized a neighborhood watch program focused on protecting residents from harassment rather than reporting suspicious behavior. Elena taught us the difference between being vigilant and being paranoid, Henderson explained to other neighborhood organizers. The lasting impact of Elena's case extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Her story had been studied in police academies, journalism schools, and military training programs as an example of how institutional failures could compound individual mistakes into systematic injustice. But more importantly, her response to that injustice had become a model for maintaining dignity and principle under the most challenging circumstances. As Elena Rodriguez continued her quiet work helping veterans transition to civilian life, she carried with her the knowledge that her own transition from military service to civilian life had taken an unexpected detour through a justice system that had initially failed her, but had ultimately validated her worth. The woman who had said nothing while they arrested her had spoken volumes about courage, character, and the quiet strength that defines true leadership. Her story reminds us that in every community, in every workplace, in every gathering of people, there are individuals whose contributions and capabilities far exceed what their appearance or circumstances might suggest. The next time we encounter someone whose quiet demeanor or humble circumstances tempt us to dismiss their worth, we would do well to remember Colonel Elena Rodriguez and the lesson she taught an entire community about the hidden heroes who walk among us every day, serving others with a dignity and purpose that requires no recognition or reward beyond the knowledge that they have remained true to the values that define their character. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.